I know your company focuses on the high choice, high cost market, and we'll come on to that in a second if we can. But what's your view on those, on what I might unfairly or crudely describe as low choice, low cost workers? Should they have more protection than those high cost, high choice workers that can work wherever they want, work
Yeah.
remotely, and name their price and have high bargaining and negotiation power and that company structure typically to protect them?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, particularly here in the States, there's been a number of pretty prominent cases and rules and regulations that have come in. You've got to look at AB5 in California, um, New Jersey, Massachusetts are a couple of states as well where it's a pretty hot topic. And I would agree. I think the protections are necessary because if you look at the challenge that they've got, as you mentioned, it's low cost, but it's the highest risk of exploitation, right? These are folks that are delivering, your food orders off of, all of the mobile apps. It's the Uber drivers where they've got to pay a big slice of their income to the matching algorithm, essentially, right? So I do think there's that. I think there's also um, more and more people have gone into the gig economy in some cases to support what they do on their full time. There's a big population, unfortunately, obviously during COVID, this happened, that they had to not just rely on that as a side income, they relied on that as their income. So that room for exploitation has certainly grown. So yeah, I'm all for the protections. I fully agree with it. What's happened, unfortunately, and I know you said we'll get into it, is that it's almost been a broad stroke. That AB5 is a great example, right?
Yes.
AB5 was designed to help the Uber driver make sure that he or she is getting paid the right amount of money that they should. I mean, they're using their vehicle, they're using their time, but the regulations were essentially, I mean, there's some room for interpretation, but essentially the same for that retired executive who's decided, hey, you know what, actually, I've got my LLC. I want to come back and do some work and, I want to charge 100, 150 an hour type thing. Huh. They are very, very different projects, very, very different rules. So having a broad stroke regulation and consideration, it's like everybody it's like saying everybody in America has to wear shoe size 9, right? It's just not going to work.
Yeah, Christian, I completely subscribe to that view about the protection for the low choice, low cost. But in my view, if you're taking the risks for the higher choice, higher cost, more mature worker with the protections of their own company, they're working on their own account, they've got their own equipment, they've got their own insurance, then in a way, I feel that the market should dictate how they're engaged. But I think that's a challenge that we've got as practitioners and experts in this space, because the operating environment for large companies is now becoming ever more complex from a regulatory perspective. And I suppose there's that challenge, number one, but then there's a challenge for those organizations. They want to and have been moving from what I would call a fixed cost based approach, right? They've typically had fixed cost employees. Since the Great Recession, we've seen that trend start to change, where they need a variable cost approach for a whole host of cost saving and flexibility and access to talent reasons. So you've got these twin trends, if you like, of increased regulation, but also increased interest and demand in the high end, high cost independent contractor. And it's really about how that can all fit together. And I think, Christian, it's probably fair to say that that's where companies like yours come into their own. Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's an ever moving landscape, right? I mean, I'm talking just domestic here in the US, but there's all sorts of regulations that are happening across. You've got to look at the EU platform directive, right? As another example. Um, in Asian markets, a very, very similar thing. It requires a very different mindset, like you say. If we think of the world of staffing, the world of big companies, it used to just be oh well, we're going to hire people full time. They're going to come into an office. They're going to clock in at 9 o'clock and they're going to clock out at 5 o'clock or something close to that, right? Now, folks are working from anywhere in the world, not just anywhere as in like me sitting in my, in my home office, and I could go into the office if I want, but I like being here when the kids come home, apart from when they're noisy. So there is that flexibility, is that change, and there are companies. If it's around gig work, it's around remote work, it's around you got to be in the office. There are some that are a little bit more stuck in the mud than others that are open to, you know what, let's it don't matter where this person is, who they are, we're going to leverage them for their skills because we have a finite deliverable and a finite project, and that individual's skills lends themselves to the delivery of that project.